Hello everybody, and Kris Broholm, a friend of the channel, the Dane, is back. Probably, or you might have seen the interview talking about the Polyglot Cruise recently here on the channel. And I wanted to take the opportunity as well to ask you, Kris, a little bit about what's going on in the other aspects of your language learning life. To start with, your own language learning, Kris. Are you doing much? Do you get time for much at the moment?
The unfortunate answer is no. It's just too much going on. I recently started working on some big projects, and I also have Actual Fluency. I do the podcast, so I've kind of resigned myself to being more of a language learning messenger slash encouraging other people who might have a little bit more time and maybe have a little bit more of a stronger motivation as well, because I don't really have, a lot of people have family from different upbringings, different heritage languages, and they live in a place. I live in the UK. English I've got sorted, and my family is 100% Danish. I've got that language sorted. So there's really not that many languages I would have a strong motivation to learn. So what I'm doing right now is just focusing on my Russian, trying to get some input, trying to bring that up to a nice intermediate level. So I'm watching some YouTubes, especially vlogs. I really like Russian Progress. I think he makes some good videos. And I recently started watching some vlogs from John, who was recently on the podcast as well. So
That's
John
and
Eva,
yes, yeah,
lovely couple, and they do videos in English and Russian, which is fantastic. I can't believe, can you imagine recording yourself for 10 minutes talking about something, and then starting a new recording talking about the exact same thing but in a different language every day?
Yeah.
To me, that's dedication. I really like them. Wonderful people.
Yeah. And John's Russian Eva, of course, is a native speaker, but John's an American, I think, and his Russian is fantastic. So
yeah, exactly.
It's a joy to see someone in action who's really mastered a language so well, particularly a language like Russian, which is difficult when you're starting off. But you didn't make it easy for yourself when you got into language learning, because the other language you started learning quite recently after Russian, I remember, was Hungarian. Also not the easiest if you're looking for a quick fix. So how do you feel now looking back? Is that entirely on hold, or where did that project get to? Because I think you lived in Budapest for nearly a year, a couple of years, maybe 3 years ago now.
Yeah, that's it. I lived in Budapest. As you know, it was quite a whim. I was going there for a language workshop, a polyglot workshop with Richard and Alex. And I didn't know I was going to live there I actually lived there for a year and a half. But that was when I was traveling a lot. So it might have only been a year when you discount all the travel. I spent a month in Canada, and I went to every single conference there was, and obviously went back to Denmark quite a few times as well. But I just wanted to learn a language because I decided to live there. So that's why I kind of got into Hungarian. But then first of all, I would say it's a lot harder to learn the language in the country than people think and say. A lot of people are like, okay, I'll learn French when I move to France. I think that's a terrible idea now that I've tried it, because you're at such a low level that you're not really benefiting much from being in the environment. The only thing that kind of helps is you get consistent kind of input from all around you, but I don't think you're good enough to kind of put it into any useful knowledge anyway. So for me, I think that was my first failure. Also because moving abroad, if you're on your own, there's so much you have to think about. It's like, where do I live? How do I make friends? How do I open a bank account? How do I pay taxes? Your head is just full of all these like what ifs and what about this and that, and then on top of it, you're trying to learn a really hard language, or any language really. So I would say the way I did it was probably the worst way, and the reason that I never really got that fine Hungarian. At the end of it, when I finally settled down in Budapest and I got comfortable with the city and really had a nice apartment, and all the other stuff kind of calmed down, I started to make really nice progress in it, and I could have basic conversations. I could order anything in a restaurant, have a little chat with the waiter, and people loved it. Going into a Subway where I'd ordered in English. This is probably my highlight actually from the trip. Going into the Subway where I'd always ordered in English because it's right in the touristy place, so they don't expect you to speak Hungarian anyway. And then ordering entirely Hungarian, and the sandwich artists or whatever they call them, just giggling away like, what happened here? So that's what happened with Hungarian. haven't really made a decision on what's going to happen to it. I think it's a fantastic language. It's really different. It sounds great, and it's absolutely useless to me. But I'm still quite interested in actually getting a little bit better in it. But that's going to come a lot later, I imagine, when I have some spare time and maybe my Russian is a little bit better. But yeah, that's always the struggle, between the practicality and the kind of interest, and just I really like it, but there's no reason for me to learn it.
And it's a big message, isn't it? There's two things there that you really need to think about whether you need a language, why you're learning it, if you're going to sustain if you're in for the long haul. And the other one is, as you say, there's something to be said for getting a good solid basis in the language before you actually go to the country, if you do have the opportunity to go and live there. Because
that's essential.
All those
no discussion.
Interesting experiences you mentioned, such as opening a bank account, sorting out accommodation, a lower intermediate speaker could have a shot at doing in the language and get a wonderful growth experience. But a complete beginner is, because these are important things as well, it has to be done right, is going to want to do it in a language that they can speak. It's often going to be English. So
yeah, and they get scammed. They get the bad deals. They're forced to live in certain areas, and if you speak the language, you can talk to any private landlord and get probably 40% lower rent. So if you only speak English, like in Budapest, you're just so limited what you can do. And I still like the city. It's actually one of my favorite cities. But as I was kind of living there for some time, I realized that for me, it wasn't a place to stay for long. It wasn't like I hadn't migrated, I was on a long trip really. And I think initially I expected to migrate somewhere and just live there for, well, let's say an extended 5 to 10 year period or something. Because I knew that Denmark wasn't really that interesting anymore to me. But as I lived there for a while and I faced up to all this like stupid bureaucracy and, getting into the post office where they, trying to get a parcel and all these like daily struggles of just not understanding the language. And the problem is that you need to be extremely good at the language before this starts to change. And it's also very hard to make friends that are not expats or English speakers, really. You can do a lot of things, but locals in most countries, they don't really take you in as a proper friend until, well, that sounds a bit strange, but you know what I mean? Like the relationships you build are a little bit shallower because it's if they speak English, they might be worse at it, and you're kind of feeling it's not the same connection. So if you don't know the language, it's a whole different experience. And I don't think people should not do it. I think it's good fun, and I had a great time in Budapest for, I was there 18 months, and I think 16 of those were fantastic. Near the end, it was getting a little bit tedious, and I was like, I made some bad decisions, and I just moved home, and that was it.
Do you think there's another language you could see yourself starting then in the future? It sounds like there's nothing that's tickling your fancy at the moment, but could you see yourself starting another language at some point?
Yeah, I really think so. I think that the idea of learning a language is something I really like, and improving on what I already know. So something like, let's say, French or Spanish. I've had so much exposure to it over the years that I don't really know anything in the language sort of practically, but French I had in school, and Spanish it's quite similar to a lot of the languages I already know. So I'm sure I'll get back to it at some point. It's just, I think you need the right inspiration and motivation to do it because it's such a big task. And you also need to be in a place of your life where you have a bit of mental stability. Well, not mental stability. That's also good, but
mental space,
I mean, general,
yes.
yeah, mental space, yeah, and general stability. Where if you're dealing with too much stuff, like if you're, if you're going through a divorce and your kids hate you and you're moving states, it's not ideal to say, okay, I'm going to start learning French. You want some of your ducks to be in order before you give that a proper crack. Not everything, of course, but for me, there's just too many other projects at the moment that take up all my time.
And a big one of those, of course, is your podcast, the Actual Fluency Podcast, which has been going now for maybe 4 years. Uh, 5 years,
five,
yeah.
5.5.
One of the biggest podcasts in this space of language learning. And what's going on at the moment in the podcast? How are you feeling about it? How's it looking?
It's just plodding along. I'm having some great guests and always trying to obviously get the most out of every guest because most people have interesting stories and tactics and methods on how to learn languages. But I think really what I want to do is give the stories a platform and really give people inspiration, motivation, maybe some ideas on how they can learn languages as well. And that hasn't changed actually since the beginning. So in that sense, I'm still doing it the same way. What I'm trying to do to get a little bit more consistent is some small things like uploading to YouTube as well. I know a lot of people use YouTube for podcasts too, so I want to start doing that. And I want to basically have some transcripts and just make it easier for people to consume the content in whatever way they want to consume it. And also, I want to at some point build like some kind of, I don't know, some epic, either write a book about it or just an epic online course or something that really takes all of what I've done with the podcast, all the wisdom, all the ideas and methods, and really just offer it in one kind of easy to consume package instead of having to listen to, well, we're at 161 episodes now. So, yeah.
The episode format is basically then a one-to-one conversation which lasts between 30 minutes and an hour, I suppose,
Usually,
with an individual guest. Do you work out the questions in advance normally, or do you just let it flow?
No, I don't prepare much at all, and that was an initial decision for many reasons. The biggest being that I'm lazy and I don't like to do too much preparation. But actually, the real reason is that I don't want the listener. You know, some interviews, if you watch on YouTube and stuff, or if you're in the UK, you watch something like, oh, I guess any chat show really, but something like Graham Norton. He always says something like, "Oh, there's this story about X," and it's like he clearly knows all about it already, and the audience is like in the dark, and then the famous person tells the story and everything. So I purposely didn't want me to be an expert on the person coming on, because then all my questions would be based on knowing a lot of stuff about him. And it would be boring for me to basically kind of drill a series of questions based on that. So instead, what I decided to do is I want to know like a minimum, but like why are they on the podcast, for instance, like a short bio, what have they done, what do they know, and what could we talk about? But after that, it's totally free conversation. And usually it works. I'm sure some of the episodes are not the greatest because of this. But for me, it's the only way to do it, because otherwise you're just sticking to your questions and you're not letting them finish. You're not going off on tangents because you want to return to kind of your agenda. And it really kind of it makes the episodes your episodes rather than the guests. But now what I do is I just say, we'll start with your story with languages, and then we see where it goes from there. And usually people have ridiculously interesting things in their history that they didn't even think about. Like some people just casually gloss over it. It's like, oh, I learned Spanish in 3 months, and then I went to the university in Italy. And I'm like, whoa, let's stop you right there, you know. And that's not something they put in their bio, so I couldn't have prepared for that. And I think that's really why the podcast is so, to me, successful anyways. It's because it's real and genuine. It's like a conversation between friends, basically masterminding or theorizing on how to improve language learning in general, and listening to some epic stories as well. I think that's very entertaining too.
One thing that struck me over the years is that you do have a very wide range of different types of language learner and all, different types of people, really, in many ways. Is it easy to find people to come on the show? Do you find it awkward to ask people? Do people approach you? Or how does it go finding the next guest?
That's the kind of the big work that I'm not too keen on doing, but it has to be done. I would say there's loads of people out there. There's so many talented language learners. And there's so many people who have had these crazy upbringings or travel stories or language stories. So I'm not going to run out of guests at all. That's not a problem. I think generally I find about eight out of 10 of the guests. Then one person will write to me personally and say, I listened to the podcast, I did this and this. Maybe you'd like to have me on the show. And then, well, actually, maybe there's a bit more, but the last one is commercial. So that will be some agency, it will be let's say some, it could also be the person themselves, but it's some kind of language business or a business that has some interest in language learning. They want to basically come on the show and promote the service, their product, their books, their materials, whatever. And, sometimes I don't really have pure commercial episodes, but sometimes I have recorded episodes that I was just like, there's no value in this for anyone listening. It's basically just a sales pitch. And so you can't publish that, obviously. So I'm pretty strict with what kind of commercial I work with, and there's very strict guidelines as well. People can, the companies that do want to go on the podcast and maybe they have a founder who speaks 20 languages and he has a great story, they can. It's not a problem. And I don't mind giving a shout out here and there, because I think one important thing about the language business is we have to support each other. We're not, if everything grows, then we all benefit. And there's no kind of like, this is a zero sum game or anything. I think a podcast is a great place to promote a business, but it has to be value first. So that I get quite a few of those requests, and I really hate it when it's from some kind of marketing agency where I have to tell them and then they tell the guy who hired them. I really prefer just to work with individuals directly, but what can you do?
I agree. I think it helps, doesn't it, if it's something as well that you think is going to be useful to people who are listening. And also, if you are approached that way, the person also has shown an interest in what you're actually doing. And it's not sort of a identikit email which has gone out to probably 50 different content creators in the language world. And, they have barely changed the name at the top of the email.
You're right.
So
that does happen.
So
I had someone from, it was not even related. It was like, John Doe is a famous internet marketer who's done this and this and this, and he'd like to come on your show to talk about personal excellence or something. I was like, that's got nothing to do with my topic. So you do get those occasionally. And unfortunately, the internet is home to many kinds of people, and there's a lot of scams and spammers out there. I get almost daily emails about people wanting me to link to them and that kind of stuff. So yeah, you just have to be on your toes and not just take anything. And that I've kept up over the years. I don't think I have had any kind of, no, I don't think I've had any questionable people on the show, like specifically predatory or anything like that.
That's good to hear. Now, you used to do seasons. I'm a bit hazy on your publishing schedule at the moment, but when should people be looking out for episodes coming up?
Yeah, I tested doing seasons back a few years ago, and it didn't really work, and it just got really confusing. Like, for instance, instead of pointing to episode 67, it would be season 2, episode 7. And I just thought, that's just stupid. That's just adding a layer of confusion. But I thought, I would take a break between seasons and then use that break to record the next season. But my life was never really that organized where I could just take a break and I had like 10 speakers lined up. It was always kind of haphazard as I went along. So I realized, no, I can't do this season stuff. So I went back to just labeling each episode. And then right now it's about a weekly podcast. Sometimes there's a bit of delay. It depends on, obviously if I'm traveling or if there's something going on or how people have recorded. Sometimes I'll have a lot of recordings scheduled, but then people pull out last minute or there's technical issues. That means that sometimes the episode is delayed for a little bit. But I would say look out for an episode every week. And if there isn't one on exactly a week after, just give it a day or two and it should be coming.
Great. Okay. And I suppose I should ask you, who's your favourite ever guest? Can I put you on the spot like that?
My favorite ever guest. That's a really good question. I mean, they're all good, of course. It's like picking your best child, I'm sure. But what I would say is, I think Steve Kaufman, the third episode of the show, is, first of all, Steve is amazing. He's a really nice guy. He's super talented, super humble, and just the nicest guy you can imagine. But basically, him giving me a chance as a new podcaster back in 2014 when I had nothing. You know, the Actual Fluency was a basic template with 3 posts on it and 1 podcast. Nobody knew who I was or what was going on or what Actual Fluency was. And then he, as the third guest, you know, in the first month of the podcast, he just said, "Let's do the recording now." And he didn't ask what was it for, what he needed. I'd written kind of like a template, standard invitation. Obviously, it's customized to him personally, but you know, I didn't really have any credentials. He just said yes. We had a great interview. If you go back and listen to it, you can tell it's early days of the podcast. I'm not quite as eloquent as I am today, but that's also fun to do. And for that reason, I think he has to be my favorite, because when you got Steve on, getting anyone else has never been a problem. Like, there's never been anyone questioning, like, well, what is this for? What is that? I just basically said, I'd had these people on, and because of that, everyone else has said yes. And now, obviously, most people in the language learning community know about it, and that's just a wonderful feeling. Remember being at the Polyglot gathering, and there was a quiz question like, mention a language learning podcast, and most people said Actual Fluency, with like, you know, I don't remember how many it was, but you know, there was like, Actual Fluency got about 5 times as many mentions as the next one. And that's really, for me, as a person who struggled with a lot of, you know, depression and all these lack of successes in the life, it's really a wonderful feeling to produce something that gives other people enjoyment and helps them as well. And so that's why I'm going to keep doing it. And I don't know if there's going to be like 100, 1,000 episodes or whatever, but as long as people want me to keep making them and I have fun doing it, I'm going to keep doing it.
Well, I wish you many more successful episodes doing exactly that, Kris. And folks, if you haven't yet tried out Actual Fluency and you like podcasts, or you don't really know much about podcasts, again, I'll link underneath to the Actual Fluency podcast, and that, I think, would be somewhere where you, as somebody who's, you know, watching this channel, is obviously, you know, crying out for information about language learning and language inspiration. It's somewhere that I think you can't go wrong and that you can't afford to miss. So, Kris, thanks very much for taking time.
And you were in an episode.
I've been in an episode, it's true, yes.
103.
That is true, although people on this channel have had quite enough of Dr. Hopkins already, perhaps. But no, it's a great way to find all sorts of different angles, folks, on language learning. Kris, as always, thank you very much for taking the time out to talk to us, telling us about the podcast and how your own language learning is going at the moment. Folks, as always,
thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for the vibe, throw me a thumbs up, tickle that bell, and share the affair. See you next time. Bye.